because the aliens would be here any day now. One of the spiritual assistants informed her that the great general had fallen at the hands of the main giant, and even his vast experience had not helped him survive the battle. But now the Empress has only one survivor left from that province, because for some reason the mutants let her go and allowed her to get to the palace. This girl was the student council president of the Cultivator Academy, and the only survivor of this massacre. The spiritual assistant calmed the girl down and asked her to tell everything about that terrible day, because further actions to stop the monsters depended on it. Unable to contain her emotions, the girl screamed that all the inhabitants had been killed and no one had been able to survive or escape from the province. She claimed that this tribe of fiends could not be defeated so easily, and that there was not just a war, but a real massacre. Even experienced spiritual elders were horrified at the thought that the bloodthirsty killers did not spare even small children. But she reported that the mutants had captured the young girls, because the purebred monsters needed helpless human sows to reproduce. Realizing the seriousness of the matter, the Empress asked the elders to look into the girls' thoughts and see everything with their own eyes. With the help of magic, they entered the student's mind and saw crowds of people who had become monsters and were ready to kill their own kind. It was a terrible sight, and it is difficult to understand how this fragile girl could have gone through such a nightmare and survived. This question tormented the Empress's advisor, and he asked the girl how exactly she managed to save her life. Then she told that the main mutant in human form forced women to entertain him in turns, promising to release the one who would give him the greatest pleasure. After such a story, there was no doubt that this girl had pleased the monster, and one could only guess how she had done it. But she said with a smile that it was the only way to survive, and besides, she had one more important news. After all, in her womb was a mutant child. Such children were called half-demons, and soon she was supposed to become his mother. Of course, everyone immediately pounced on her with reproaches, accusing her of debauchery and betrayal of her native empire. But at that moment the unfortunate girl had already made her decision, and with a gloomy smile was ready to carry out her plan. And the next second, she rushed straight towards the Imperial Guard to use his weapon. Having snatched his sword from its sheath, she was ready to do something in front of everyone that none of these people would ever forget. Realizing that there was no other way out, the girl plunged the sword straight into her chest, performing an ancient warrior ritual from the times of the samurai. Just a moment ago, the Empress had condemned her for her debauchery, but now she realized that she had been very wrong about this student. In the end, she asked the Empress to just take all her memories and find a worthy use for them. The Empress said that if the memory were extracted through the art of the soul, the girl's shell would disappear, but there was no other way out. Even there, in that terrible place, the monster said that he himself was from a family of cultivators who could not be distinguished from people. Yes, they really could mix with people, and now almost everywhere there was a mutant that could not be detected even by strong magic. Even among the servants of the Empress there could be monsters, and many of them probably served as scouts for the aliens. In addition, the student knew that one werewolf had already gained the Empress's trust and wanted to find a certain sacred artifact with her help. Surely they were talking about that very sword, having received which the monster would achieve the highest power and become invincible in battle. The Empress suddenly remembered that she had recently seen a huge whirlwind near the academy, and had already suspected a talented magician there. Right now, the capitals of the 7 great empires were safe, but this was humanity's last attempt to save itself from destruction. The advisors understood that if the sacred relic fell into the hands of the Dark Clan, chaos would begin, and in alliance with the monsters, they would become invincible. Death did not frighten the advisors, but judging by the girl's story, if many half-demons bred in the empire, no one would have a chance to survive. One could only admire the courage of the hunters on the border, because none of them chickened out or ran away from their fear. Among the hunters were young cultivators from the academy who had never truly fought against monsters, and this student was also one of those students who had to accept death in order to avoid chaos and destruction. For a moment, all the voices in the Imperial Hall fell silent, and the Empress barely held back her tears, realizing the scale of the disaster for the Empire. It seems that the student's story could be believed, because despite her wounds, she held out until the end, and even brought benefit to the Empire. Suddenly, the Empress had an idea and said that they would have to turn to the only person who could help. At the same time, Henry, as usual, was in his room and doing his usual thing. Meditation became a part of his life, and he improved his skills every day, preparing for the upcoming fight. Even the immortal spirit, who also often meditated during his life, became worried about the guy who was too carried away by it. Then a vortex of energy instantly formed around the guy, and he announced that he now possessed the secret technique of the invisible eye. Even the immortal spirit was frightened by such a loud cry and dropped his favorite toy, asking his young ward not to scare him like that. However, it was difficult to calm the guy down, because having received such strong skills so quickly, anyone in his place would have behaved the same way. He even covered his face with a pillow to contain the internal impulses bursting out of his body, but he realized that it was useless. Looking at his palm, he realized that the power that was now within him and obeyed him needed training and application in life. Without wasting any time, he directed a small portion of the destructive force into the open window to test the effect. It turned out that the speed of his mana flows was very high, and the tree trunk where the charge hit instantly broke in half. The immortal spirit was delighted with how skillfully his ward applied the new magic, and it became clear that other techniques could be tried. But looking at the magic watch, Henry realized that without the necessary artifacts, his mana would leave his body too easily. Although the spirit was already preparing to celebrate and promised Henry that everything would be fine and there was no need to worry about the little things. Moreover, now he had that most powerful artifact that he got from the scoundrel Charlie in payment of a debt. This artifact was conveniently small in size, but Henry wanted to test something and activated the enlargement of his new blade. Within seconds, the sword began to grow, turning from a small souvenir into a formidable magical weapon. And then the guy suddenly stood on it with his feet and was able to fly through the air, standing on it like a surfer on the waves. He flew so fast that even the incorporeal immortal spirit could not keep up with his charge and fell far behind. Yes, it was a very convenient way to get to the academy quickly, and it became clear that Henry would never be late for classes now. He landed deftly below, choosing the best place to quickly get inside the academy building. No student before him could so quickly tame the sacred artifact that holds the power of hundreds of generations of magicians. Once on the roof of the academy, the guy again reduced the relic to a size convenient for carrying in a pocket. On the way, he read the news that the Dark Clan had attacked the provincial border the previous night, killing hundreds of millions of residents. Henry knew that in a month the demons would attack, and from his past life, he remembered what this invasion would ultimately lead to. As he was approaching the classroom, he suddenly heard the familiar voice of his friend, cheerfully telling about some recent battle. Entering the office, he realized that Jimmy was again praising his friend's talent, saying that no Dark Clan mage could compare in strength to Henry. His classmate immediately supported Jimmy, as he had long believed in the strength of this talented student, and was glad that he would soon teach the members of the Dark Clan a lesson. Chloe also joined this conversation, believing that they needed to attack back right now, while the strength of the main team members was at its peak. True, one student, an old friend of Charlie, disagreed with her, thinking that only a complete idiot could believe in this nonsense. But Chloe believed that this loser was simply jealous of Henry, because she herself saw what the talented young man was capable of. In response, the guy reminded him that he already had the third level of combat power, and with such strength he had no reason to envy various scum. He became so excited that he jumped up from his seat and declared that everyone who knew him respected the guy for his strength. And those poor kids who don't even have money to learn cultivation won't be able to defeat geniuses like him. All this time, Henry listened silently to this vain student, realizing that although he was stupid, he said a couple of true things. After all, the path to immortality did not divide anyone into classes, but people themselves divided into those worthy and those not worthy, and this was the main problem of humanity. Realizing it was time for him to have his say, Henry quietly asked what the argument was that was going on between the students in the office. He understood that they were talking about him, and he wanted to hear right now, face to face, everything that this arrogant youth thought about him. But he said with a smile that he was just waiting for Henry, and thought that his friends were extolling his talent too much. And then, standing right in front of him, he said that if Henry was really that strong, let him first dare to fight him one-on-one. The guy was prepared for this turn of events, but warned that those pathetic losers on the sports ground thought the same thing. However, this was exactly until the moment when their real fight began, after which many of them ended up in the hospital. Seeing how Henry's appearance had changed so abruptly, the student's legs even began to tremble with fear, because he understood that the guy was not joking. Henry didn't even have to show his true strength, and just some light magic was enough to suppress the fighting power of this arrogant boy. Even those guys who supported Charlie and his men were horrified by Henry's aura and how scary he looked. Only Chloe was not at all afraid of Sophia's friend, realizing that she herself was gradually falling in love with this student. Of course, Jimmy didn't miss the opportunity to jokingly tell Henry that he could intimidate anyone, but not a strong warrior like him. And then he warned his friend Charlie that he was lucky not to find out his own strength in reality, because all this time he was holding back so as not to give the student bruises. Of course, It was easy to behave this way with the support of a strong friend, and Henry asked him not to go too far. Otherwise, he would have to prove his words in deeds. At that moment, a student ran down the corridor, having read in the news that Henry had surpassed even Vincent in the immortal rankings, taking 50th place. The guys actually saw that the ranking had been updated in the morning, and a first year with a 15th rank combat power had taken a pretty high place. True, for the student himself this was bad news, because now the clans looking for new recruits would definitely start watching him. But Henry suddenly gave his friend a cheerful nudge and asked him to take him straight to Michelle's office. Jimmy didn't understand why his friend needed to meet the teacher, and what the next thought was that came to his head. It turned out that the guy suddenly decided to apply to the Faculty of Immortals, although he had been putting it off all the time. But what changed today? Meanwhile, in Michelle's office, the girl was reading the morning newspaper, where the main news was the terrible destruction after the mutant invasion. Even the brave general had to sacrifice himself that day. Otherwise, the mutant army would have reached the capital, and he was able to hold them off for a short time. It was just unclear why the Empress was so afraid of these vile creatures, because everyone praised her fortitude and the strongest advisors in the Empire. Suddenly the girl heard a noise outside and realized that someone was walking quickly straight towards her door. She was not mistaken, because Henry was not only on the threshold, but kicked down her door, entering as if he was at home. Jimmy, standing behind, already understood the dangers of such a bold act, but Henry cheerfully declared that he wanted to transfer to the Faculty of Immortals. To calm down a little, Michelle even reached for a cigarette, seeing in front of her that same first year that everyone was talking about. At that moment, for some reason, she didn't feel any mana fluctuations from him, and wanted to know how a student who was only level 9 ended up so high in the rankings. Lighting a cigarette, she warned that the registration fee had been raised to 100,000 this year, and exams for this faculty were taken once every 6 months. But the guy already had an answer ready, and he loudly placed a huge bundle filled with banknotes on Michelle's table. It was strange to see such a huge sum of money on a poor student, and Michelle didn't understand where he got this money. Then she realized with a smile that the guy had been preparing for this day for a long time, and the announcement of a large registration fee was not a surprise for Henry. However, he stated that now on Michelle's table there was not 100, but 200,000, because he wanted to take his faithful friend with him. Jimmy always looks at the students of that faculty with envy, so Henry decided to give his friend a little surprise. It was too late to refuse, even if Jimmy's conscience tormented him, realizing that his friend was ready to part with such a huge amount of money for him. He even burst into tears of happiness, realizing that no one had ever sacrificed so much money for him, just so that he could go to study. Jimmy was even willing to pay his friend with his own body if he wanted, although it was clear from Henry's expression that he was not thrilled with the idea. In the end, I had to give my enraged friend a good hit, as he couldn't cope with the emotions of the happiness